Hi guys, XYZ, and I got myself another movie review. I know it's been quite some time, unfortunately, but yeah, so going out of my way to watch Sonic the Hedgehog 3, the latest of the Sonic films. So let's dive right into it. Okay, so to try to keep this summary as short as I can, yeah, so the movie opens up at a prison gun facility. Well, of course, gun stands for the Guardian Units of Nations, kind of like the generic militarized group that tries to keep peace. But anyway, in that facility, Shadow ends up escaping from Shadow the Hedgehog ends up escaping from that facility, and then the movie transitions to Green Hills, where you see kind of like a celebration that going on with Sonic, being on Earth, and kind of like like a Earth Day birthday kind of thing. But anyway, as everyone was celebrating, including Knuckles, Tails, and the Wachowskis, one of the directors from Gun ends up approaching the group and tells Sonic about the situation. Well, Team Sonic, I guess they would call it, the Team Sonic about the situation. And of course, they make their way to Tokyo in order to stop Shadow. And of course, when they make their way to Tokyo, they try to take on Shadow. They get wrecked pretty bad, and of course, Shadow ends up escaping. And in the meantime, Team Sonic ends up talking with the commander of Gun, and of course, he kind of reveals a little bit of backstory on Shadow himself. But I guess during that backstory, unfortunately, the whole group gets ambushed by Dr. Robotnik's drones, and unfortunately, the commander gets killed in that little scuffle. But before he dies, he ends up passing a key card to Sonic, telling him to keep it safe. And eventually, Team Sonic ends up tracking the drones to, well, Agent Stone, Ivor Robotnik's servant, I guess you could say. And eventually, they find out that Ivor Robotnik's drones were being programmed by someone else. So for the time being, Team Sonic and then Dr. Robotnik team up to try to find the ones responsible for the drones. Well, eventually, it leads the group to an abandoned gun facility, where it kind of shows a little bit more about Shadow's backstory and how he used to befriend a little girl named Maria Robotnik, who was the granddaughter to Gerald Robotnik. And of course, eventually, Team Sonic and Ivo ends up going to the facility. They get ambushed again by Shadow, and then of course the uh, Gerald Robotnik ends up making an appearance, and eventually, of course, they team up. Well, Gerald Robotnik and Ivo Robotnik end up teaming up. They steal the key card that Sonic had, and said that it was half of the key needed to activate a powerful weapon by created for gun known as the Eclipse Cannon. So they have, well, of course, the Robotniks needed to get the second half of the key card, which is out in the main gun headquarters out in London. So they had to make their way out there. Eventually, it kind of gets to the point where Team Sonic have to go to London to try to steal the key card before the Robotniks do, who also being teamed up with Shadow anyway. And of course, I guess the giant plan that kind of ends in disaster at the very end, as Shadow ends up stealing the key card, and it leaves Tom Wachowski being injured throughout the scuffle. Well, afterwards, Sonic uses the power of the Master Emerald to become Super Sonic to try to take down Shadow. Of course, the Robotniks got the Eclipse Cannon active, and initially the whole idea was just to take down the people that wronged Shadow, for killing Maria. But eventually find out that Joe Robotnik wants to not only take care of that, but he wants to just completely blow up the entire planet, as he's seeing that humans are just are not worthy as they keep constantly making mistakes. And of course, eventually, it kind of gets into a weird scuffle between Ivo and Gel Robotnik. Kind of gets this huge fight. Eventually, Ivo ends up killing Gel Robotnik. It's kind of odd. And of course, during that scuffle right there, though, Sonic and Shadow end up battling once again. Eventually, Shadow even gets his own super form, Super Shadow. And of course, they battle all across the entire planet. And eventually, it kind of leaves them on the surface of the moon. Eventually, they kind of reconcile differences as they both kind of share. Sonic and Shadow both share similarities on, of loss and how loving one another can help brings them strength, whatnot. So near the end of the movie, both Shadow and Sonic team up to try to take down the Eclipse Cannon to try to prevent it from destroying the planet. And at the very end, uh, it goes into having Ivo and Shadow sacrificing themselves to destroy the Eclipse Cannon. And in the long run, afterwards, you see that Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, along with the Wachowskis, enjoying their peaceful day once again, and eventually kind of leads them into going into a foot race. And of course, it leads into the end credit scene where Sonic ends up winning the race by a long shot, being in a completely different state. And eventually, he gets ambushed by a bunch of metal Sonics, and all of a sudden, another Hedgehog, who is later revealed to be Amy Rose, appears. And of course, that kind of leads into another new film altogether. And at the very, very end of it all, after the end credits, you see that Shadow did somehow survive the explosion off of the Eclipse Cannon. Well, for the good of the movie, I guess one thing I can say immediately is I kind of do like the comedic elements of it. It doesn't go like pop culture, kind of like how it was in the second movie, but there are some comedic moments. I mean, it's a Sonic movie; it's for kids, so they had to throw some comedy in somewhere. The second thing I do like is the fact that a lot of action, a lot of fast-paced action, I think even more so than the first movie, considering that you're bouncing around between different parts of the world, and especially also reaching to the vastness of space. So it kind of expands greatly. And the third thing I would say I like is kind of all those subtle references that they kind of throw into the film. I mean, they have they have references to the Chows and the Chow Guardian. Then they also have I think kind of like a subtle reference to Shadow the Hedgehog, the game, considering Shadow was on a motorcycle near the beginning of it, and of course bringing in Joe Robotnik and Maria, it's kind of references there, and it's just kind of throwing in Metal Sonic and Amy, uh, at the very end of it all, kind of throwing a lot of outside outside sources into this movie. Heck, there was even a scene with Wade Whipple, the kind of one of the protagonists from the Knuckles TV series. He does make a cameo appearance in this as well. Well, for the bad, I guess you can say, it's kind of more nitpick than anything else. But I guess for one thing, kind of the dynamic between the Robotniks, Joe Robotnik and Ivo Robotnik, it kind of gets a little bit cringy at times. I would say. I mean, granted, they're both played by Jim Carrey, and Jim Carrey is just being Jim Carrey, but it kind of gets a little maybe over the top at times. But I don't know, that's just me. The second thing I would probably say is the the dark personality, the dark demeanor that Shadow has. It just didn't really feel genuine. I don't know. It kind of felt a little bit forced at times. It felt like he was just being dark and moody just for the sake of his own character design, and especially like near the end of the film where he just you know reconciles differences between him and Sonic. it just goes away. Like all his hate and anger just goes away like that. It just kind of feels forced for the most part. And then the third thing I would probably say is kind of the lack of regular humans in this film. As you know, like we didn't see too much of the Wachowskis, and we saw them a little bit at the beginning, maybe a little bit part way, I guess. But for the most part, we don't really see too much of a dynamic between these anthropomorphic characters and the actual humans. And I don't know, I kind of would like to have seen more of a closeness, especially as they are like all of a family. All right, so in the end, yeah, I would say Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is a pretty good movie. Pretty nice follow up to the last movie itself, and it kind of expands more on well, at least on this film universe of Sonic the Hedgehog. But I noticed they kind of took a lot of elements from from the games and whatnot and other medias and kind of threw them into this, kind of almost tying them in, complementing each other. Kind of makes it feel like living in the same type of universe that Sonic would live in. Yeah, so I mean, for the most part, I think it's pretty good follow up all in all, and obviously, kind of waiting to see how this is gonna carry over into the eventual sequel to this. But in the end, though, I would probably give this a final score of probably like a solid 8 out of 10. I'd say it's definitely worth a watch, especially up to this point if you've been following with the Sonic movies. Granted, I've still not played the games, but it kind of gets me more interested with the character in itself. All right, guys, the Double XYZ. Until next time.